Full House.
It's an angry world out there, isn't it? In a way, everyone's a lot closer thanks to social media and what have you. Some thought this a good thing. They didn't think it meant that people would essentially form gangs and shout and scream at each other for any little thing, did they? That every single thing that goes on could now be magnified by 1,000,000%? It doesn't take much. The slightest misstep could turn you into a serious pariah, cancelled for all eternity. It's like a jungle. Sometimes it makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's times like these when I miss television. You know, television how it used to be, when it was basically the only thing to do. While you can now shout at your least favourite celebrities directly, it was kinda more therapeutic when there was a barrier between you and them. And in the days of TV, well, some things were designed to be shouted at. I miss the days when there existed a pink and yellow, massive, bulbous cartoon figure through which, as a nation, we could direct all our hatred and frustrations. I miss Mr. Blobby. Not that Mr. Blobby was good or anything, it's the apex of utterly cringeworthy TV. Now I didn't exactly think about that at the time, but then I was 7 years old and thus precisely in his target audience. And yet Mr. Blobby wasn't a kids show stuck in a nice and cosy morning slot. He was, for a short time, the biggest star in England, bigger than the show he was on, which was on in the ultimate slot, Saturday evening prime time, when the whole family's together and our nation's programme makers were tasked with entertaining them. And this is what we got. The absurdity of it meant that we, for a time, descended into Blobby mania, until we all got our heads straight. Now I did briefly cover this back in the A to Z of licensed games years ago. There is a game to look at after all, but the Blobby phenomenon deserves a more detailed examination. Like, firstly, how did we actually get into this point? Let us start by looking at a certain genre of telly. It's a concept you'll probably be familiar with, although its name doesn't carry much weight outside of Britain. Light entertainment. What exactly is light entertainment? Well, a whole load of different things, but all with a certain set of rules. It must appeal to everyone, not be controversial in any way, funny but not riotous, entertaining but not utterly transfixing, comfortable television for all ages, la whole family. A harsher person would say that it's purposefully somewhat mediocre. The things themselves can be variety shows, game shows, sketch comedies and what have you, mainly those three. Is purposefully mediocre harsh? Well, perhaps. It's not as if there weren't great people who specialised primarily in light ent. Bob Monkhouse, Bruce Forsyth, Morecambe and Wise, Leslie Crowther, the two Ronnies. All of these people spent most of their careers in light entertainment. They came from the glory days of the form, any time from the 50s and 70s, when television was really the only thing to do, and these people, some of whom essentially spent their whole life in the show, were put together and had a real enthusiasm for putting on a good show and entertaining the nation. The class of a Bob Monkhouse one-liner, Forsyth game show, or Morecambe and Wise sketches, basically permanent. However, in the UK, the sheen gradually went off of light entertainment in the 80s. Suddenly, chunks of the family had better things to do. Video games, for example. The old glory names of the genre were, well, old. Ratings began to sag, programmes stagnated, things had to change, which is where a defining name in light entertainment would come in. Noel Edmonds. Initially famous as a Radio 1 DJ, Edmonds first gained his TV hosting spurs in 70s kids TV with the fondly remembered multicoloured Swap Shop, and was also one of the original hosts of the old Top Gear, way before Jeremy Clarkson. All the building blocks of a promising career then, which would ultimately result in his first Saturday light entertainment gig, the Late Late Breakfast Show. At first it seemed like it was going to meet a fate shared by other failed light ent programmes, it struggled in the ratings and didn't look like it was going to last a series, but the admittedly infectious nature of Edmonds as a host soon wore in, and the variety kicked hard enough to make the show stick. Big musical stars, comedy bits, celebrities, all that. but a few other things that push the envelope further, such as have-a-go common people performing extremely dangerous stunts. Yep, not a joke that. This was one of the things light entertainment had to do to get noticed. The notoriously risk-free television format suddenly had to take risks. And so the Late Breakfast Show introduced the Give It a Whirl segment, in which a member of the public phones in, a wheel is spun on a variety of dangerous stunts, and the person trains for a week in order to perform this stunt live on the show. Now, does this sound like a good idea to you? Really? Sometimes stunts went well, sometimes they didn't. Some stunts were deemed ridiculous and too dangerous, such as plucking a member of the public from an exploding chimney by a helicopter. Other stunts resulted in injury. In 1983, a stunt driver, Richard Smith, was heavily injured after attempting to leap 230 feet in a car. Another person, Barbara Sleeman, was fired out of a cannon and broke her shoulder. I think you know where this is going. In November 1986, a 25-year-old man named Michael Lush took the Give It a Whirl challenge. His stunt was something called Hannam High, a 120-foot bungee jump from an exploding box. Preparations for the stunt were not ideal. Apparently there was no actual trained stuntman on hand to really guide Michael through the process. The person who was there hadn't performed the stunt in question. There was no safety officer present, and no way for Michael to contact the team on the ground once he was in the box. In the morning rehearsal for the stunt, he waited 2 minutes before being told to take the leap, which he did. The carabiner clip holding him came loose, and he hit the ground. Michael Lush was killed instantly from multiple injuries. This tragedy saw the immediate cancellation of the Late Breakfast Show, and as the resulting case dragged on, the details, the faulty equipment and lack of health and safety put a black mark on just about everyone involved, including the host. For Noel Edmonds, this incident looked like it was the immediate end of a promising TV career. The warning signs were there. Barbara Sleeman had said after her injury that the BBC didn't care about people, only about views. And, well, she was kind of proved right. And so Noel Edmonds disappeared from television. For a couple of years, anyway. So we now fast forward to his triumphant return, and the character the nation loved to hate so much. After doing his time away and re-establishing himself with the Saturday Roadshow, on the 23rd of November 1991 the beast would truly be unleashed from a large house in the village of Quinckley Bottom. Noel Edmonds would, by force, take the throne as the king of Saturday evenings. His enemies could do naught to stop him, as he tore them all asunder in a volley of gunge. Every Saturday evening, a nation sat amazed at what they saw. Noel's House Party. At its peak, the show could command as many as 15 million viewers, and one senior executive called it the most important show on the BBC. Which might tell you something about the general grey and hopeless misery of the 90s in John Major's Britain. The House Party was basically a massive variety show, with Edmonds as ringleader. Celebrity guests would get gunged, practical jokes would be played, there'd be plenty of chances for members of the public to win prizes, without risking catastrophic fatal injuries this time, and there'd be all sorts of other segments. What it had was a sense of highly organised mayhem. Chaos is too strong a word for it, really. All organised by Edmonds himself, running around the house like a bloody idiot who's just set his hair on fire. I said this line 5 years ago, but it's good, so I'll repeat it. Noel's House Party is what all British TV would look like if the Nazis had won the Second World War. I mean, for light entertainment it obviously ticked all the boxes, and it was right for the time. I mean, it's not like Noel Edmonds was the only kind of slimy, patronising, smarmy and insincere host on television, treating everyone to sob stories of someone's pet getting run over before quickly cutting to Eamon Holmes in the gunge tank. This is just what mainstream telly looked like back then. It's kind of hard to explain the appeal of it unless you're literally 7 years old. And there was no greater example of that than what the show introduced in the second series, Mr. Blobby. Mr. Blobby formed a part of one of the show's mainstays, the Gotcha, in which a celebrity gets pranked, in this instance under the guise of a fake children's show starring our rotund hero. When the cameras start rolling, the celeb tries to do their job, It could be Wayne Sleep trying to do ballet, or Garth Crooks demonstrating football, Gary Davis DJing, while trying to handle Blobby, who shouts "Blobby, Blobby, Blobby" constantly and keeps on breaking everything and screwing up takes while the celeb looks on confused and befuddled. Eventually, right at the point when everything's about to go completely wrong, Blobby takes his head off to reveal Noel himself. The celeb probably calls him a flaming chump, or words to that effect, and we cut back to the studio where Noel congratulates said celeb on being such a good sport. What a laugh. Not that Noel was in the costume the whole time, a man named Barry Killaby was the one actually doing most of the work. The house party was already a big success, but Blobby took it even further. All of a sudden, people really took to this character. He was the star of the show. Even after the second series, at which point Blobby obviously couldn't have been used again for pranks because the celeb would immediately have known what was up, he was still all over the show, usually for utterly hilarious antics and japes with Noel. Because hey, obviously Noel wanted to bask in Blobby's glory. He could have hardly had Mr. Bloody Blobby stealing his thunder on his own show that's named after him now, could he? Not that I know if that was the motivation or not, although it would hardly be surprising, would it? So, through 1993, the nation basically went Blobby mad. Christmas 1993 was perhaps the apex of the whole thing, when the stores were absolutely chock full of Blobby merchandise. There was a Mr. Blobby video comprised of all his gotchas, Blobby drink cups, Blobby backpacks, Blobby dolls, Blobby slippers, Blobby odour eaters, Blobby colostomy bags. There was no end of it all. There was even a Blobby drink, a sort of pink lemonade in a very garish pink and yellow can that's bound to feature someday in one of OSW Review's What Bar sections. And of course, above all of this, there was the Mr. Blobby single. One thing that's odd about the UK, we really do care, or at least we used to, about the Christmas #1. Now I'm pretty sure Americans don't give two hoots, but here the Christmas #1 was one of the most coveted spots in music. Bands and artists would release special festive videos and songs, would pull out their biggest guns for the occasion. We've had a lot of bad ones. Renee and Renato, St. Winifred's School Choir, Bob the Builder, but none compare to Mr. Blobby. The song sounds exactly like you would expect a Mr. Blobby song to sound like, full of his farty voice, a bouncy kids bop beat, and a children's choir. Also, a rap, because Blobby was down with the inner city youths too. The video features a big party, highlights of his best bits, rubbish green screen stuff, a permed Jeremy Clarkson. It's really something, and it stayed at #1 for 3 weeks, including the Christmas slot. The worst song ever to be in that fabled position. And of course, well, that was hardly the end of it now. There were plenty more TV appearances and chances for him to go nuts and break things. Apparently he was even beaten up by the wrestler Scott Hall on one of them, who then proceeded to hit on the host, but I can find no evidence at all for this. I have used my position as a broadcast journalist to ask Mr. Hall if he has any recollection of this on Twitter, but so far there's been no reply. There were more videos. And of course, you can't have a Blobby single without a whole Blobby album. The Mr. Blobby album, which features classics such as Old McBlobby Had a Farm, Jelly Bottom Rock, Blobby Lock and the Three Bears, and Christmas in Blobbyland. It's actually a concept album of sorts, with all the songs linked together by a radio show hosted by Tony Blackburn. You know, exactly like The Who Sell Out. Exactly like it. Yes. 59 minutes this thing goes on for, so it does. I can't find sales figures for it, but I do imagine it was quite popular in North Korea's labour camps. And that's still not all. There were, of course, the Mr. Blobby theme parks. There were 3 of those, none of which did particularly well. One in particular caused a scandal when the local council misbehaved somewhat and didn't get much in the way of approval for building the damn thing, ultimately losing £2.5 million over the whole ordeal. There aren't a lot of pictures of the park in its heyday, but one of the sites in Somerset stood derelict for years and became a magnet for various people, vandals, ravers, and eventually explorers who marvelled at all the waste still there. A lot of it's torn down and demolished now, but to this day there are still artefacts of Blobbiana lurking inside this wildlife park. A somewhat creepy destination. There is also the game, of course, which we will get to soon enough, but there were many more silly things, such as 2 more Blobby videos that all expanded the Blobby lore, including his wife and child, imaginatively titled Mrs. Blobby and Baby Blobby respectively, and even a budding MP named John McLagan who decided to change his name by deed poll, put down his £500 deposit and won as Mr. Blobby in the 1995 Littleborough and Sandworth by-election. He got 105 votes, didn't get his £500 back, and was stuck with a very stupid name indeed. Blobbymania certainly did run wild through 1993 and 94, but like all fads, there comes a time when the sheen starts to peel away. Perhaps a defining moment came in 1994, when Mr. Blobby was invited to a child's birthday party. Blobby performed his usual antics of saying "Blobby Blobby", falling about and breaking things, but went a step too far when he knocked the birthday girl's cake on the floor, reducing her to tears. The girl's suitably aggrieved father proceeded to mount the stage and punch Mr. Blobby in the face. Needless to say, the event made national news, and after this utter scandal, well, the mood started to turn. But before we really get into the fall of Mr. Blobby, well, we have a game to cover. The Mr. Blobby game came out for the Amiga and PC in late 1994, so quite late on. It was released by Millennium, who you may also know for games like the James Bond series. You can play at any time as either Mr. Blobby, Mrs. Blobby or Baby Blobby. You get 3 lives, 1 for each character, and 3 continues, and there are 60 levels. You beat them by colouring enough of the levels in, which you simply do by running over the ground. Kinda like City Connection, you know? Although it is exactly like a SNES game called Super Troll Islands, also by Millennium, a licensed game in and of itself based on the ever-popular big-haired troll dolls. It's the same game, although the camera is zoomed out a bit here. So here's the really shocking thing about Mr. Blobby the video game. Believe it or not, it's far from the worst game I've ever played. In fact, it isn't half bad. It's hardly a classic or anything, but it's a simple, straight-up platformer. No real thrills, there's power-ups, irritating music. It's a distraction and no more, but it's not something that people really hate on. The game was coded by one man, Paul Carter, and it was his first job in the industry. In an interview for the Amigos podcast, he said that originally his job was simply to port Super Troll Islands over to the Amiga, but then the game was changed to Mr. Blobby once Millennium snapped up that license. All told, it took around 9 months to develop. What else to say about the game? I mean, it is quite a simple affair. The controls are a bit wonky at times, but this is also true of the SNES game it originally came from. The jumps are incredibly high and everything feels like it's on ice, Mario-style inertia only even more exaggerated. The graphics are as garish and generally bad as you would expect, but then, quite honestly, what would you expect from a Mr. Blobby game? It'd look a bit daft if it was all different shades of brown, wouldn't it? I mean, obviously it's tasteless, so's the character itself. Another odd thing about the game is that it does seem to be chucked together at random. There's no worlds or anything like that, although there are a few themes, so it almost feels like there should be. The difficulty level's a bit inconsistent too. Sometimes you'll be in a really hard level, and the next up will be a bunch of easy ones, and this kinda continues on right through the game. Easy, hard, hard, easy, hard, hard, easy, easy. It's a bit confusing. Anything else? Well, we do have a debug mode which allows you to ogle over some hex if you like. Other than that, it's a mediocre game in the end. A small, light affair, one that will probably bore you long before you get through all 60 levels of it, but it's fine enough for half an hour. The sort of thing that you play for a bit, probably until all the 3 blobbies are thoroughly dead for one continue, and then you'll shut it off. You've had your fill. But surprisingly, through that time, you won't hate it. This straightforward mediocrity, in the end, makes this game the best thing to come out of the entire Mr. Blobby craze. Speaking of which, let's wrap it up. The middle of the 90s pretty much signalled the end of Mr. Blobby, certainly as a popular figure. By 1995 there was an air of what on earth were we all on when it came to the whole palaver. Was it a collective second-hand high from the loved-up rave era, in which everyone's mind got so muddled that we welcomed a grotesque pink and yellow figure with open arms? Just what happened here? Now obviously there'd been people in the broadsheets who had stroked their chins, scoffed at Mr. Blobby and treated it as the sad infertile squirts of a terminally ill island nation since the very beginning, but soon enough the whole country was joining them. Alas, it doesn't take much for a figure like Mr. Blobby to soon become the most hated person in England. Soon enough the same could be said for Noel Edmonds too. As the 90s wore on, the house party gradually lost its appeal. I mean, let's face it, after you've seen one celebrity get luminous goo dropped all over them, you've kinda seen them all. Ratings for the show gradually declined to around 8 million or so, which, geez, feels like a major freaking number now, but still it stayed on the schedule for what felt like an age. Finally, in 1999, someone finally decided to take the alien show out back and put a bullet in its temple. Noel, showing off his subtle sense of humour, took to the stage after the news broke with a fake axe planted on his head and said, "We've been axed!" And so the doors closed once again on Crinkly Bottom, and with it Noel Edmonds' television career. And yet, he is some sort of renaissance man, coming back again in the mid-2000s with two big hits, Are You Smarter Than a 10-Year-Old? And, even bigger than that, Deal or No Deal, the completely random open-the-box game which was, to be honest, entirely carried by Noel's over-the-top, almost cult leader-like personality. Which is kind of apt, as he does have a certain interest in new agey, weird things. You know, The Secret and all that kind of stuff. One also can't forget the Sky show Noel's HQ from this comeback, almost house party-esque with a load of random things put together, but also with a lot of Noel Edmonds putting the world to rights in a very Daily Express type of way, and having a go at feckless council individuals. It's said to be the closest that television has ever come to recreating the Howard Beale show from the classic 70s film Network. Sometimes he's up, and sometimes he's down, but just when you least expect it, he appears, as if nothing has changed. Mr. Blobby in the end staged something of a comeback as well. He frequently appears as an ironic figure on comedy shows. Harry Hills used him tons, 90s nostalgia quiz shows use him loads. He's always good for a laugh as everyone goes, "Hey, remember Mr. Blobby? What the blobby hell was that all about, eh?" But he's not quite dead yet. Indeed, as recently as a couple of months ago, Noel Edmonds himself spoke earnestly about pitching a return for his house party with Mr. Blobby in tow, and he was dead serious about it. The idea seems completely ridiculous, but quite frankly, in a world with Noel Edmonds in it, anything, and I do mean anything, is possible. Bye for now. Over the years, I have endlessly championed the licensed game. I've pointed out the good ones, had a laugh at the weird ones, taken great pleasure in trying to put them into context and seen just how well they represent the product they're tying into. It's fun. But there's also no denying that there are a lot of bad ones, and hoo boy, we've seen a bunch of them. There's the horrors of Dick Tracy on the microcomputers, the sheer incomprehension of a game based on EastEnders. If you have only surface knowledge, you know the likes of Superman 64 and E.T. on the Atari, but when you're a seasoned veteran, you know that Superman 64 isn't even close to being the worst Superman game. There's Superman on the Game Boy after all. And now today, we have another set of games that truly belongs right at the bottom, another contender for the worst licensed game of all time. But to cover it, we also have to march, once again, into the glorious weird sector of old UK television. Forget Superman, he's worthless. He's nothing compared to Super Gran. We will get to the horrible games in due course, but it would be silly to just look at them without also peering into a British kids show that will probably leave anyone who's not British completely flummoxed and wondering just what on earth makes us like this. Why on God's earth does anyone decide that making a series about a heavily Scottish old age pensioner who has special powers is a very good idea? Why does anyone then decide to watch it, and then celebrate it so many years later, make it a fixture of Twitter accounts who endlessly beg for retweets by asking if anyone remembers Boy George, and flushing out your balls into a pop sock over pictures of Bananarama? Just what is the deal with Super Gran? I mean, it's not actually that ridiculous a story, but such things need a build-up. It started out as a kids' book, and then it was adapted into a kids' show in 1985 by Tyne Tees Television, those responsible for service in the northeast of the country, meaning places like Newcastle. You know, the land of the Geordies, where vids comes from, a place where blokes apparently walk around shirtless in the middle of December, and let's not forget, the new creative hub for YouTubers in the UK. You weren't ever going to get the swankier likes of London Weekend Television making something like Super Gran. Anyway, what's it about? Simple. One day, an elderly grandma is going about her business when an inventor accidentally hits her with a magic ray. Now this could have caused her to explode into a horrific red cloud of blood, sinew and other assorted viscera, but instead it gave her magic powers and turned little Granny Smith into Super Gran, charged with protecting the people of Chiselton, a town that would have been famous for making chisels if it weren't totally made up, from the evil likes of Scunner Campbell and his gang of muscles. No, not the soul band featuring erstwhile US Gold founder Jeff Brown. And naturally, a grandmother needs 2 children to assist her on these escapades, her nerdy little grandson and inventor Black's assistant, Edison. Episodes feature Super Gran doing all sorts of important tasks. Her powers give her Alan Shearer-esque levels of football skill. She can sort out a traffic jam in the blink of an eye, topple over crooks and other nefarious individuals. She can run at the speed of light, fly into the heavens. All sorts. It's all thanks, of course, to the porridge that she has to eat in order to attain her powers. You get loads of lovely cheap special effects too. The trail that Super Gran leaves behind, using trampolines and trick camera angles to simulate her flying, cupping her ears to hear sounds from far away. The budget for this show was, as you might expect, very low, but there's a certain inventiveness about it, a very crude inventiveness. Gudrun Ure, who played Super Gran, only ever had one stunt double too, meaning that she actually did most of the stunts herself. You know, just like Jackie Chan and Tom Cruise. The other thing about the show is, of course, the accents. The show is meant to be set in Scotland, and Super Gran's accent might well be the thickest Scottish accent in the history of British television. Others who can't necessarily keep up their put-on Scot accent, as opposed to Gudrun's real deal, usually end up flipping from Scottish to Geordie and back again, sometimes in mid-sentence. Now, let's be honest, my American watchers, you folks aren't that good when it comes to regional British accents. So let's throw a few clips from the show at you. Go into the comments afterwards and be honest about how many words you understood. And don't worry, Southern fairies like myself tend to have a bit of trouble from time to time as well.
But I don't want to be famous, Granny. I want to be my normal old granny at home, changing me duvet and cooking me chips.
Don't forget the adventure playground's depending on you.
Yeah, well, it's no contest, is it? I mean, with your super strength and super speed.
Oh, not to worry, Hen. Sorting this lot out's easy peasy to a Super Gran like me.
I'm gonna replace him with this robot, like, while I kidnap the real beast from Battenberg and take him back to Merseyside with me.
What could possibly happen in a wee place like Paddleton and Sea? Not a lot.
Another notable thing about the show is the amount of guest stars that appeared in it. Over the course of 2 series and 26 episodes, there was a lot. First up there is, of course, legendary Scottish comedian Billy Connolly, who not only appeared in the show, but also co-wrote the theme tune. Others usually had roles as themselves with the odd character thrown in, and it's virtually a list of British TV greats. There's Bernard Cribbins, who a lot of younger folk probably still know today from Doctor Who. Speaking of doctors, Super Gran featured one of the last appearances of the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton, with Carry On veteran and comic legend Charles Hawtrey also checking out not long after appearing on the show. Other well-known figures include Bert Kwok, Paul Shane, Joan Sims, Roy Kinnear, Leslie Phillips. A lot of actors. Guest appearances weren't just restricted to thespians, mind you. Celebrities made it on too. The show had George Best, the world's strongest man Jeff Capes, Eric Bristow, Lulu, Willie Thorne, and Gary Glitter. We'll skip over that one quickly. A more heartwarming appearance came from British comedy demigod Spike Milligan. He apparently enjoyed his appearance on Super Gran so much that he became a fan and season ticket holder of Newcastle United for the remaining years of his life. Now, you might well be baffled at this show if you've never heard of it. The production values are shocking, the acting is desperate, the plots have stakes lower even than an episode of The Joy of Painting. But the show was quite a success in its time. It's certainly well loved by those who grew up in the northeast, of course, but it even had some success internationally. The show certainly made it to Canada, I believe, and it was actually one of the first Western shows that was sold on to Chinese television. Super Gran really cornered the market for communist countries that begin with the letter C. In the early 2000s, a redubbed version of the show became a hit in Cuba. It even won an International Emmy Award for Children and Young People in 1985, so it's not like the show was a purely regional thing. I mean, Tyne Tees had a hit here. But alas, although a third series was planned, Tyne Tees decided to scrap it in 1988 in favour of producing more daytime TV quiz shows, such as the almighty Chain Letters. I suppose a legend like Jeremy Beadle doesn't come cheap. There were at points plans to make Super Gran the movie, but they never came to fruition. However, the show still has, in some corners at least, its fans and admirers. I'm not sure if there's enough for a Super Gran convention, you know, a Gran Con, but people remember the show fondly, and Gudrun Ure, the real-life Super Gran, is still alive and kicking today at 92 years of age. People certainly remember the show a lot more fondly than they do the games. Ooh boy, have I got some corkers for you today. The Super Gran games, as you might expect, were released only on British microcomputers, and they were made by Tynesoft, Newcastle's #1 producer of computer game software, and a company that's most certainly worth a video all of their own someday, for various reasons. Still, it's only fair and right that a Tyne-based company produce a game on Super Gran, isn't it? And so they did. 2 of them, although one of them is little more than a rather lousy text adventure and not that worthy of note. It's the first one that's by far the more famous, the one that we're really interested in here. It appeared on the Spectrum, C64, C16 and Amstrad. And yes, we'll be looking at all the versions. This game is certainly worthy. It is the most broken and terrible piece of micro software featured on this channel since the venerable Cassette 50. Maybe even since Squidge. I'd go that far. And hell, I've even got a bunch of popular YouTubers to back me up on this one. So just listen to these veritable continents of common sense.
They're most entertaining. I think of all of the octogenarian superheroes out there, I think she's definitely the best.
And the game?
It's shit.
Super Gran was, ahead of its time in terms of, female-empowered superheroes in the 1980s. Billy Connolly did the music for it, which is great, and I have that on vinyl. Overall, it's a bit of slapstick fun. Nice, I'd like to see it brought back with Lulu in the role. There you go, Netflix. Commission 10 of them, you bastards.
Super Gran?
Yes, Super Gran.
Are you too young to know Super Gran?
Do
you genuinely not know Super
Have I missed something? I need
It was a cultural icon.
I missed something. I'm just thinking of the Mighty Boosh episode with the killer grannies.
You're not that far off, to be honest with you.
It's not the right thing.
She flew on a bicycle. And she had a Spectrum game that nobody knows how to play. Everybody live streams and nobody knows how to play it.
The one question for me is something I'm just going to look confused at the camera for.
That's what people will be watching the video will be.
Any other questions?
No, not really.
No, that's it.
Super Gran, the video game, presumably.
Yeah.
So my friend had that in a pack-in from his Spectrum, which he must have bought from Dixon's, because they're the only ones who did pack-ins like that. It was bloody terrible. You've got the incomprehensible start screen with the weird white thing she was on, then some kind of platform game where the physics didn't work properly, and I can't remember anything beyond that except pain and sort of mild nausea. And if I remember, the Spectrum version is one of the better ones as well. I did look into it and work out which was the worst version. I can't remember now, which is a shame, because I could have sold you that information for 15 pence.
Wow, well, what's the deal?
Super Gran. So as a kid, I watched a lot of Super Gran growing up, and I actually loved Super Gran watching it. It was a really weird show with a Scottish lady, and she would say things. But as a kid show, I loved it. If it's about a video game, that's a different story. No.
Was it ITV?
Yeah.
Literally on the other side of the planet. I think it's horrific. I used to watch it. No, I didn't used to watch it. I used to come on, and I used to think this is the worst program I've ever seen, and used to turn it off. I actually preferred the game version to the actual program.
Wow. Controversial.
Yeah, whereas at least you can play it, kind of.
Can you?
It's more playable than the show, isn't it? The show is just...
Well, by definition, yes.
Yeah. The show is just unwatchable, and the game is virtually unplayable, so I give the game a slight edge for that.
I mean, I tried to play it on the stream when I was already quite drunk, and I couldn't play it, so I don't know if that's because I was drunk, because it's a bad game. Probably because it's a bad game, maybe.
Thank you. Let's start with the Spectrum version, mainly because it's the one I was able to get the most footage out of. Super Gran consists of 4 levels, all of which are different and terrible in their own way. In the first, you fly around in the skimmer and shoot down members of Scunner's muscles gang. This is really hard because your skimmer is huge and a single shot is enough to take you down. They only come from the left or right, so you kinda have to blow these bastards away as soon as they come on the screen if you're to stand a chance. After you've shot an arbitrary amount of them, you move on to Sheet 2. Now I don't get this one. All you do is fly left and pick up some fuel. There's one balloon that flies around which you have to make sure that you don't hit, but you'll do that so long as you just keep flying left and picking up fuel. It's poorly executed, to say the least. Again, this stage ends after some arbitrary length of time. The third sheet is the hardest of the lot. You have to drive to the next level and avoid colliding with Scunner's car that's also on screen. You don't actually have to be ahead of it, just don't hit it. However, this is harder than it appears. It's always tracking your movement and you have to keep adjusting your speed. Go slower and it automatically pulls ahead, go faster and it automatically falls behind. So keep doing this, but try and wait for an open space so that it's easy to avoid the car. It looks like a broken rendition of Spy Hunter, and it feels like it too. The last sheet is the easiest. You simply have to perform a quick jumping sequence to get to the top, avoiding both the rising water and bombs from Scunner's chopper up above. Jump into the chopper, and that's it. Then the game's length is artificially increased by repeating these 4 stages once more, only with Super Gran being invisible. The only way this is represented is through her sprite being garbled, making you think that the game's gone doolally. But no, this is actually what it's supposed to look like. And yeah, that's Super Gran. The only award for all of this is, of course, a quick well done message before starting the game again from Sheet 1. I didn't mention, although you were surely able to hear, that all of this is accompanied by the very worst possible 48k beeper rendition of Super Gran's theme. I mean, good heavens! Quivens, as the Gran herself might say. And then the driving sounds from the third sheet are just even worse. I can't quite think of any worse Spectrum sounds than the ones that this game offers up. It's unlistenable to the point where you'd rather just keep the tape playing and listen to some loading noise instead. The controls for each section are also awful. I didn't mention that it seems to take forever to actually change speed in the driving section because it's so unresponsive, inevitably resulting in a crash. And of course, graphically the game speaks for itself. Super Gran may have been a low-budget show, but this does not do it justice. And you know what? This is the best version of the game. All the others are, unbelievably, even worse. And I'll have to show you why. You may think that the C64 version offers better graphics and sound. And okay, you'd be right, I guess. I mean, the music is probably the worst usage of the almighty SID chip I've ever heard, but it is better than the 48k Spectrum beeper. And you can actually see the frickin' town in this game as opposed to some green mountains. But gameplay-wise, the first stage is probably the most playable out of all the versions, but still terrible. You can use shields this time, and you know how much time you need to survive for in order to complete the stage. You also get a similar timer for the second stage, and now balloons are faster and more likely to hit you, especially if you're flying. However, you don't actually need to fly at all. Nothing that's on the ground will kill you. If you're on the ground, you don't use any fuel. So just don't bloody fly and concentrate on avoiding a balloon or two for the time it takes to finish the stage. This level is just simply broken as a concept. Level 3 is... I don't know if it's even possible. The road is small and the cars are now comically big. I wasn't able to get close to beating it and it's a total embarrassment, but I can show you the 4th level with a trainer and... I just have no idea. It now seems that jumping has been replaced by flying, but here's the kicker. You can't touch any of the platforms. If you do, you die. Over and over. So, yeah, in this level, you just press the button and die. I have no idea how you do it. This is ridiculous. And no, this isn't the worst version of the game either. That title belongs to either the C16 or the Amstrad CPC version. C16 could be a contender. I wasn't even able to get past the first level of this one as it just goes on and on and on. You have to try and use your shields here to have any chance at all and the controls are just a joke. But I wasn't able to see any more than this. I dread to think what the other 3 levels looked like. And so there's the CPC version, which for my money is the worst. I'm not sure if the person who coded this even knew what a computer looked like, let alone how to program. It's just so slow. You need some ridiculous degree of luck, or liberal usage of save states if you're on an emulator, just to get past the first stage, because the flying is that slow. And it only gets worse on the second stage, which is even more broken than what we've already seen. One balloon follows you very slowly. You two are also flying very slowly. You have to fly and therefore pick up fuel. But, well, just fly in a straight level close to the ground. You still pick up fuel that way whenever you pass a station. Literally, to beat this level, all you do is hold down left. Nothing else. Once again, I wasn't able to beat the 3rd stage, it's just way too slow and uncontrollable. But I feel confident in saying that this is the worst version of Super Gran. All of them are shocking, but this is the one that I would say is perhaps the single worst licensed game ever made. And by this point I'm an expert, so I would hope that my opinion on this matter carried some weight. A more shocking licensed game than Super Gran has perhaps never been known. So all that remains is to try and look behind the scenes and see just what people thought at the time. Did anyone actually think that this was good? Well, no, not really. Crash Magazine in particular savaged the game, bemoaning both the lack of the Billy Connolly theme song on the B-side of the cassette, and worst of all, the price. Believe it or not, Super Gran on the Spectrum was sold in the shops for a tenner. Seriously, £10 bloody for this shite. This was kind of a theme with Tynesoft. Most of their licensed games cost a tenner, usually because most of them followed a similar theme to Super Gran, in that they would consist of several different types of game and therefore could be sold for the full price. It was a similar story with their first license, the even more Geordie Auf Wiedersehen pet. Believe it or not, they would graduate from Super Gran to Superman. In 1989 they would make the heavily panned Superman Man of Steel, which was also basically a collection of minigames disguised as different levels and was programmed by Ian Davidson, who also did the C16 version of Super Gran. David Black, who did the Amstrad version, is only credited for that game alone. The most interesting credits belong to the Spectrum version, mind you. There's 2 credits for that. First there's F. David Thorpe, who did the loading screen. Soon after he'd be hired by Ocean and would do several iconic loading screens for them. Now that may not seem like much, but consider that you would be looking at the loading screen for at least a good 3 minutes while the game's loading from tape. Suddenly it's more important, and he did some bloody good ones, several of them for games made by the almighty Joffa Smith. The game itself though was programmed by Donald Campbell, who would actually go on to have a long career in the industry. In fact, before Super Gran, he'd already made a game for Arctic called World Cup Football, which would become far more infamous as the game that US Gold hurriedly purchased from Arctic in 1986 and turned into World Cup Carnival. And that's not all. After this, Donald Campbell would become one of the co-founders of Tiertex, a company that would work with US Gold quite a lot and, yes, they would produce quite a lot of games that not many people like. And for all of that, Tiertex are still a living company to this very day, even if they're not in the games industry anymore. One of the few survivors of the era. Tynesoft in the end would not be a survivor. They went out of business in 1990. And yet their own history is very interesting indeed. They were the mad Geordies of the industry, with a whole raft of tales to tell, most of which aren't exactly PG to say the least. But they certainly had fun along the way. That's the impression I get from folks who I've talked to who served time in the company. Some of Tynesoft's young team would go on to really good fins, people like Julian Jameson, better known as Jules from Sensible Software, or David Mowbray, or Alan Cox, Kevin Blake, Steve Toole. There's quite a few successful folks who came through Tynesoft, and even if their games weren't necessarily the best, they probably deserve a video of their own. Super Gran, however, was one of their first games, and undoubtedly one of their worst. Still, would you really want a non-Newcastle based developer getting hold of this licence? I mean, imagine what Ocean would have done with it, or US Gold, or Codemasters. It would have probably been so mediocre that there wouldn't have been anything at all to say about it. A show as low budget and as murky as this one? Perhaps this is the game it's best suited for. Bye for now, and a Merry Christmas to you and everyone at home. The last time we encountered the somewhat infamous Specky-era gaming house Tynesoft in a video, well, they'd done this. Bloody Super Gran. You know, the game about a weird children's TV show that hits an impressive trio, being unwatchable, unlistenable, and most certainly unplayable. I even said that it was perhaps the worst licensed game ever. But, silly me, I am of course wrong. It isn't even the worst licensed game made by Tynesoft. Obviously it's close, but there is definitely something worse. A game that's doubly frustrating because you'd kind of think that there would be some hometown pride involved in its making. But oh boy, that's a big no. Super Gran is really quite awful, but it doesn't even hold a candle to Auf Wiedersehen Pet, a licensed game that is truly mind-boggling in its incompetence. A little background info is, as always, warranted, although we won't delve too far into detail. Auf Wiedersehen Pet is, of course, an actually quite celebrated TV series, especially its first series, which the game is based on. As is befitting dank and miserable early 80s times when lots of people were looking for work, the series is based around a ragtag group of construction workers who, unable to find work in the UK, find a job in West Germany instead, a Dusseldorf site where they live in miserable conditions, are set about by a typically vicious boss named Eric, and make the best of things by getting into scraps and going to the local beer kellers for many a night on the piss. The show had a good pedigree, written by Clement and Lefrenet, also known for Porridge amongst others. It had good actors and it was critically acclaimed. So there's not a lot of weirdness here really. Aside from that, you don't necessarily often see drama comedies like this get games. Still, it kind of makes sense when you think that the three main characters of the show were from Newcastle. Tynesoft, a proud Geordie company, making a game centred around a famous show featuring a bunch of Geordies? Suddenly it's a no-brainer. Still, how do you take this from the screen to, the screen? If there were more action involved, it would perhaps be more obvious, but something like this requires a bit more creativity. Or, you know, certainly something more than whatever processors Tynesoft came up with. There's no point in doing anything else other than showing you just what the result of getting this license was. A 1984 game that came out on the Specky, Commodore 64 and BBC Micro. We're looking at the Spectrum version and, honestly, there's no point in looking at the others. Why? Well, one look at a few of the title screens should give you an ominous feeling in the pit of your stomach. Remember games like Cassette 50 and Squidge? Remember one of the reasons why they were so bad? It's because they were written entirely in the BASIC language. And guess what? So is this. Therefore, it's going to be virtually the same game no matter what bloody platform it's played on. I generally expect lousy C-tier games to be written in BASIC, it's kind of a given, but this is a licensed game, plunked on the shelves, that Tynesoft were trying to sell for £8. £8. This is, at the time, a full price game. Just keep that in mind. Anyway, you play as Oz, Jimmy Nail's character from the show, and the format of the programme will be familiar to anyone who's played a Tynesoft game before. Yep, it's minigames. Just like Super Gran. The games take you through a typical day in Dusseldorf. In the first, you have to build a wall at the site while trying to avoid trowels being chucked down and the face of your queer-looking, Yes, queer looking, because this is 1984, and the trope of German authority figures being both Führer-esque and effeminate is very much in play, Boss Eric. Also, I'm really being generous calling those fins falling down trowels. They're bloody arrows. And speaking of generous, how can I possibly call that fin running around Oz? Often with licensed games you expect there to be an attempt at creating a likeness of the person from the show. Even Super Gran had something that looked like Super Gran. This fin here? It's a stick figure. It's not reminiscent of anyone in the slightest. It's a frickin' basic stick figure. Jesus. So, you have to build a wall. I have seen many a YouTuber struggle with this, thinking that you actually have to build a wall. It's hard seeing as your character moves so fast, like they're on ice, and the moment you go up more than 2 blocks, you're basically screwed. If you try to move left or right without any bricks underneath you, you fall to your death. It's impossible to build a wall. I mean, how's anyone supposed to do it? However, in this instance, my fellow YouTubers have actually given the game too much credit, if that's possible. Who says you need to build a wall? All you need to do is find a gap from the bottom to the top, and just go straight up. Congratulations, you've won. That's how basic and inane this level is. All you have to do is make a bloody straight line. I've played more complex fun school games. This continues, with more stationary disembodied heads of Eric thrown randomly at the screen, until you either die because an arrow hits you, or you just get bored and chuck Oz right off the top of the wall to the floor, breaking his neck, severing his spine, shattering his back, and leaving him a crumpled, twisted, and unquestionably deceased mess on the floor. Quite frankly, I see it as putting the poor wee Geordie sod out of his misery. Never mind, because no matter what you do, Oz is up and running anew for the second stage, even if you die. In the second stage, the workday is done, the lights of Dusseldorf come on, and Oz is off to the local beer keller for a pint or two. Being a shifty Geordie type, he's going to try and steal them from the tables, avoiding the wrath of the barmaids that randomly appear as you're trying to take them, or indeed hitting the tables themselves or a wall. This is harder than you think because, again, your character moves super fast. The gameplay is like a bastardised version of Snake. You pick up the beers, get them down your neck, and then if you succeed, the stage repeats with more pints to pick up until, inevitably, you get caught, or run into the wall, smash your face, and, again, die horribly. It's absolutely as god-awful as it looks. In the third, and indeed final stage, Oz has had his bevies, and he now has to stagger home while avoiding lampposts, police cars, and the security guard blocking the entrance to the group's hut. None of the cars move or anything, all this stage is memorisation as the lampposts gradually, and very, very slowly, go out one by one. Either some of them will go, or all of them will. And then you have to find your path in the dark to the top of the screen, don't hit the guard, and hey presto, you're done. Cue some awful single-channel music, and the remark, "Well done, kidder," before the game just repeats. Failing this stage is the only way to actually get a game over, by the way. The other 2 stages can be failed as much as you like, so long as you beat this one. And again, the controls and general random nature of fins being chucked at the screen make it harder than it might appear. But generally it's so simplistic, so basic, if you'll pardon the pun, that it can scarcely be called gameplay. And, yeah. That's it. £8 for all of that. Something that would be considered a rip-off even as a budget title. It's quite comically ludicrous. And yeah, it's right up there as one of the very weakest attempts at a licensed game there's ever been. It makes Super Gran look fantastic by comparison. At least that wasn't written in the frickin' basic language. There are games on Cassette 50 that feature more depth than this one. It's a complete joke. The only other thing worth noting is that of all games, this actually supports the bloody Koa micro speech, an add-on to the Specky that added some robotic voices to games that supported it, although you only get a "well done" or "you lose" out of it for this game, and not much else. It's another game that just totally boggles the mind. You don't understand how something so awful could have ever gone out, even with the general lack of quality control that existed back in the microcomputer days. And you know what? There's not an awful lot I can go on. Tynesoft naturally promoted the game with adverts that somewhat optimistically said that sales for the game would reach Jet Set Willy proportions. Needless to say they didn't, because even the Germans were buying it. And needless to say, they weren't. There was one review of the Specky version in Crash where they somehow gave it a score in the mid-50s. You know, sometimes I do wonder if we look on the supposed glory days of computer game magazines like Crash, Zap and all that with rose-tinted glasses. But very little can actually be found out about the making of the game. The person responsible for it is a man named Bob Carr, and this is his only credit for Tynesoft. The only other credits that can be found under the name of Bob Carr are mostly for games by a C64 software house named Magic Carpet, and one of these is a somewhat infamous game called Stroker. This is a screenshot of said game, and as you can see, I've heavily censored it because, well, I don't want my channel to be taken down. But yes, exactly what you think is going on here is what's going on. Now, is it possible that the same person who made a game like this would then go on to make Auf Wiedersehen Pet? I'm really not sure. From what crumbs I could find, it's quite possible that the fella isn't even British, let alone a Geordie. He might well be American. If that's true, then I'm really without a clue. Would Tynesoft, the proud Newcastle-based games company, grab the licence for a popular show based around people from Newcastle, and then dump it in the hands of some bloody porn game programmer from the States who'd likely never even seen the show? Is that really what happened? I mean, it doesn't matter that this game is on the Spectrum and the platform barely existed in the US. This game was written in BASIC, and is thus easily ported to any microcomputer that supports BASIC, that being pretty much all of them. It could have easily been written on like the C64 originally and then ported over. So while I can't find anything out for certain about the creation of this disaster, the questions it brings up are certainly intriguing, and quite perverse in the level of sheer incompetence they suggest. Tynesoft are just so bloody weird, aren't they? But again, it just goes to show, you can keep all those LJN games from the NES. Compared to this, they look like Metal Gear Solid. The bounty of terrible licensed games on the micros is plentiful, and there is so much more out there. And this is without question one of the shiniest, most brilliant and flawless examples of complete and total unadulterated cack that we've seen yet. Bye for now. Oh god. Oh no.
Whack them in an oven dish, with cheese sauce, and then bung in a mixture of cornflakes, grated cheese, and sunflower seeds all over the top. Into the oven for 20 to 30 minutes.
I like how the plate's orange as well. Everything's orange here. Oh, don't do that. Oh god. Hello everyone. I thought for something a little different I'd look at something that's not video games. It's actually a staple of late night British television back in the 90s. Sort of anyway. If you've been seeing my Twitch recently, you might be familiar with a show that I've been watching called Get Stuffed, which is a show where students try and pass things off as grub or whatever. And I think it's only fair that I do a video all about it. But first, by way of introduction, well, what exactly is Get Stuffed? Back in the 90s, things were a bit different. There were actually proper TV shows broadcast past the midnight hour on most of the channels. We didn't have the rolling news, casino broadcasts or home shopping crud we get these days. Instead, the wee small hours were dedicated to a wide variety of programming. Some of it was old films, of course, another bunch of it was repeats of shows from America, but there were also a lot of original broadcasts for the insomniacs out there, or those who'd just come back from the pub. Some of it was actually good even, like In Bed With Me Dinner, a show where Bob Mills laughs at old things from the telly and is nothing like what I'm doing on here at all on YouTube, no siree. And some of it, well, it was either horrific or incredibly strange indeed, and Get Stuffed kind of falls into both of these latter categories. Get Stuffed, a 5-minute show that you'd usually find chucked in at random points in the nighttime schedule on ITV in the early mid-90s, was aimed specifically at one group of people who could generally be counted on to stay up all night and sleep all day: university students. The aim of the show is simple: to offer students recipes that they could cook up on their undoubtedly tiny budgets, and the recipes were usually thought up and cooked by young folk who were students themselves. As such, the results are often, interesting, at best. At worst, they resemble an inhuman eldritch monstrosity passing itself off as a plate of grub. Right, our first dish is a real doozy. These two French students are going to show us how to cook mustard rabbit. Now you might think mustard rabbit, well that doesn't necessarily sound the most offensive thing on this earth, but wait and see. Oh, Status Quo would be proud of that one. Wash your hands. Every episode, wash your hands. It makes up for all the dirt surrounding everything else. Gotta love the unibrow as well. Looks almost like Liam Gallagher, mixed with a bit of young Ronnie O'Sullivan. And see, I like mustard. I love mustard. I don't know about rabbit, but I love mustard. What are you doing? Are you sure? I mean, that's a lot of mustard smeared on that rabbit. In Coleman's English mustard, that'll blow your arse off and your nose. The grime everywhere. Look at that oven! My word, that hasn't been washed since George VI was king. Yes. Nice, apparently. Yeah, nice. No. No, really no.
Have the cream fish.
No.
Or fish creme or creme fraiche. Yeah, creme fraiche.
No. Oh, God, no.
Now have the...
Double cream in the juices of the rabbit. Oh, my God, no. Stop. Just... Please stop. No, c'est pas. Merde. Oh, dear Lord. No, don't put it on there. Sorry, I have to freeze frame. I mean, just look, this is the final presentation. I mean, the most appetising things there are those two sorry-ass florets of broccoli, but I mean, the rabbit itself, I mean, with all that mustard attached to it and now that it's cooked, you know what it looks like? You know what that looks like to me? It looks like it's covered in phlegm. So, you know, if you really want to save money, just, you know, get your mate who smokes 80 rollies a day to, you know, hock up some Golden Virginia special syrup on it. And as for the cream, well, if you want to save money there, simply put 2 fingers down your throat and hoy up onto the fucking plate. Probably taste better. My God, look at that. First time I saw this, seriously, it was all I could do to not be sick. Live. No. Oh. Your friends will not think you are great, believe me. Your friends will never darken your doorstep again. My God. You will be shocked to learn that very little information about Get Stuffed actually exists on the internet nowadays. However, shockingly enough for a 90s show screened at stupid o'clock in the morning, there was a website maintained by the programme's production company, Last Ditch Television. As you can see, it's a glorious piece of 90s web design. You can smell the Microsoft front page coming off of every last hyperlink. Just look at that bloody Comic Sans and all those ghastly drawings. I managed to get some video examples of the show from this old page, which is one of the reasons why sometimes you can see every last bloody pixel on them, but it also has a few interesting tidbits related to the show's origin and creation. Apparently it was all Saddam Hussein's fault. The onset of the First Gulf War left 2-bit cable companies desperate for programming, and one of them, Lifestyle Television, decided to let the show's creators, the 2 mystery chefs, ask about in their studio for something called the Hasty Tasty Show, which alas appears to be lost. But this gave Last Ditch Television their big TV opening. One of the show's trademarks, the constant reminder to wash your handies, stemmed from the crew being bollocked by an ITV executive due to the constant disgusting state of the kitchens in which the shows were shot in. There wasn't actually enough budget to give the studio any kind of clean. Or for much of anything at all, in fact. Well, so much for the efforts of the students. What about our mystery chefs? What can they do? Because this next episode features them cooking. Are they any better than the students? Do they make rabbit mixed with bloody tobacco emphysema sauce? I don't know. Let's see how they fare. I mean, blubber bar, isn't blubber a main ingredient of the soap that they use in Fight Club? Isn't that right? Blubber? That looks like Oliver Harper. Try a little bite of that.
They're wonderful.
You like them?
I'm a dentist, and even though I'm a dentist, they're wonderful.
I'm a dentist, and you know what? I really love those blubber bars, because if you eat one of those, chances are you're going to be seeing me real soon. Oh my heavens above, yes, yes, we get it, they're superheroes, we bloody get it, you know.
Blubber bars. How?
And we get the name of the dish too, you know.
Look at that slide. That's an anti-frictional device.
Oh, no, it's a fucking spoon, mate.
There's me.
So it seems like what they're doing here, essentially, they're making honeycomb. Okay. So a blubber bar is basically a non-copyright infringing DIY crunchy. Okay, right. Now, I see one problem with this. There's one problem here. I mean, it's all well and good. Honeycomb, okay, that's a cooking process. I mean, it's better than smearing mustard all over rabbit. One thing, this programme was broadcasted like 2 in the morning or whatever and aimed towards students. So, it's post-pub programming, basically. So, you're trying to get these students to cook. So what if they watch this? They've just been at the Students' Union all night, you know, getting hammered on woodpecker's side or whatever, probably paying for all their pints by check. They come home, they watch this, and they're like, yeah, let's make some blubber bars, pissed out their skull. Honeycomb's fucking dangerous. That stuff, if you screw up with that, that sticks to you, that burns like a motherfucker. Jeez. It's a wonder anyone didn't bloody burn themselves trying to recreate this. I mean, I suppose that is if someone actually watched this show, which not many people did, but you get my point, don't you? I'm really, just no. Come on. So basically it's just sugar cooked and cooking chocolate. Just taste of sugar. I really can't see that being in any way nice at all. Oh, and don't forget the margarine, don't forget the flora. Just no. Or alternatively, just buy a fucking Crunchy. I mean, come on. Just buy a Crunchy. I mean, how much were Crunchies when this was made? What, 20p? 30p? At tops? This was made in like 1992. You know, just buy a Crunchy. Why make it? Why risk literally burning your face off making honeycomb when you're a low class student? And just buy a Crunchy. Heavens above. Probably cheaper to buy a Crunchy. Just don't get it. I don't understand. Did Get Stuffed make any kind of impression at all on people? Well, probably not on too many. Even if the website proudly talks of how it got a nation to think a whole lot more about washing their hands, seeing as every episode made a point of telling you to do so. In fairness, a reminder to students about the importance of good hygiene probably isn't a bad thing. It did make a bit of an impression on the writers of legendary BBC satire show The Day Today, who included a parody of Get Stuffed called Sorted in one of the episodes, starring Crispin Somerville and... oh, bloody hell, not him. Hold on a sec. Ah, that's so much better. Anyway, the parody features Crispin and trans rights prattling about and showing you what to do if your dad unexpectedly pops his clogs, complete with the necessary reminder to wash your hands. It's pretty funny, of course, although even with the subject matter, it's still not a whole lot more ridiculous than the actual show. The way that Get Stuffed is put together is so utterly 90s, complete with nonsensical cuts, cameras that never stand still and film from every bloody angle, constant loud noises, duck whistles and the most in-your-face presentation possible, that you can't really do much except try to match it. You can only imitate, not improve. Right folks, this last one that I'm going to show you is something very special. It is called Corny Flaky Bakey. No, not cornflake bake, corn flaky bakey. Now you might be immediately wondering just what the bloody hell is a corny flaky bakey anyway. Well, these two ladies are about to show you. You're in for a treat.
And a tin of sweet corn.
Sweet corn, onions, mushrooms, all things that traditionally go with cornflakes. Oh, and don't forget the cheese. Why would you want to forget the cheese? I have a bad feeling about this.
Wash our hands now.
Get it right. Oh, and don't forget to wash your handies. I tell you, maybe they're right. There was more washing of hands on this show than any others. I mean, you never saw Delia Smith wash her blooming hands. Dirty so-and-so.
Over here.
She learned.
Fair comment.
Now for the hard work. The vegetables are quite clean now.
Don't forget to
Stop
mug
by chopping
every
the
time you
mushrooms.
say something.
Just
Mug
rough
to the
chopped
camera.
mushrooms is really
Make
you
the
don't
most
have
of
to
it.
eat, not posh.
No, it ain't posh. Now chop your leekies. And don't forget to take the skin off before you crush it. Aye, broccoli.
Heavens above, my kingdom for you shutting your fucking face.
Everything's chopped. Let's go to the front. Could really make a roux, but for quickness, we're going to use a packet. Here we go. Pop it all in.
I mean, roux, packet, cheese mix. Does it really matter when you're going to put fucking cereal on it?
Extra flavour.
And what is it with the mustard? Every dish seems to have mustard in it.
And then we're going to add some little milk to make a paste. It's a little piece. Give it a quick stir.
It's funny how this show is 5 minutes long, but it makes you just spectacularly reary by the end.
Add half a pint, stir
I feel like you've just got around with Mike Tyson.
While we're making
Certainly get enough
sauce,
mileage
I've
out of
been
that
stirring the
fucking
vegetables.
horn.
I think they're just about done now. Take them over here. Pop all your vegetables.
So much duck whistle, I'm wondering one of them doesn't slip over.
And here's the magic ingredients.
Oh, no.
Cornflakes. That's what we call
No.
it.
No!
Corny, flaky, bakey wig. Put the mixture
Corny,
on top.
flaky, bakey
Try and
wig.
get it as even as possible.
Oh yeah, you gotta make it even as possible, for presentation purposes. Notice, by the way, how the cornflakes, when they come out, they look exactly the same. Oh god. Oh no.
Whack them in another dish
Oh.
with a cheese sauce, and then bung in a mixture of cornflakes, grated cheese, and sunflower seeds all over the top. Into the oven for 20 to 30 minutes.
I like how the plate's orange as well. Everything's orange here.
Go on top there, of course.
Oh, don't do that! Oh god. Oh man, this bloody show. Quite the nostalgia trip, and not in a good way. Does Get Stuffed have any kind of legacy? Well, I could do the easy thing and say that this show was a precursor to the more relaxed and laddish style that Jamie Oliver approached telecooking with when The Naked Chef started up on BBC, but that feels like an altogether unnecessary insult. I mean, the food here is already gruesome enough. There are somewhat endearing qualities to the show, as there often is to a lot of things from the 90s that were shown in the dead of night, and were clearly made with a budget of 50p and a used condom. It's crap, but in such a way that's intensely nostalgic, because you don't get stuff like this on television anymore. Hell, even cooking videos on YouTube have largely progressed far beyond the level of this production, and you won't find them making things like mustard rabbit and corn flaky bakey either. Well, most of them anyway. It's probably not of interest to anyone beyond the freaky sorts like me who have a perverse interest in old and unremembered British television, but then it's not like the programme ever had any aspirations of being mainstream. It does manage to capture something that a lot of shows strived for, certainly those aimed at young people back in the day, and a lot of shows didn't manage to get. Sincerity. It actually does feel sincere, like a proper product that was made by students and for students, something that's very relatable to them. It's just that, you know, you probably wouldn't want to go around Les for dinner anytime soon. Twitch is something we seemingly all do nowadays. Millions of hours are logged onto the website every day, seemingly even more so during this year when, well, lots of us are doing more stuff at home. Even aside from all the live streamers who made their name on there, the website is chock full of celebrities who may not have even known what a Twitch was before this year, being entertaining on their own Twitch channels in these times when traditional gigs are, somewhat less of a thing. With this big wave of interest, there also comes a load of simple curiosity from people. Articles on boomer-centric websites titled, "What is Twitch? Where did it get started? What social class do the people of Twitch belong to?" and so on. Just what are the origins of sitting in your room in front of a web camera and talking crap for several hours? Well, most people would point to a man named Justin Kan who, in 2006, opened a website called Justin.tv. He went somewhat viral simply through broadcasting every minute of his life, from going out into the world, to playing games, to just chatting, even to sleeping. Soon Justin TV was opened up for other people to broadcast on it, people playing games gradually became the most popular thing on there, and that side of the website spun off to something called Twitch.tv. The rest, as they say, is history. But no, I have something earlier to offer. Justin Kan's efforts were most certainly not the first, but there was a man, quite a famous fellow, who beat him by a good 5 years or so. He beat just about everyone, one of the first people, maybe even the first, to sit in front of a camera in his bedroom and do utter crap in front of thousands of half-interested people procrastinating at work. And that man's name was Keith Chegwin. Yeah, that Keith Chegwin. In 2001, Keith Chegwin opened up a website called Chegger's Bedroom, where he broadcast himself in his room, much to the intrigue of British people everywhere. Some thought it curious and maybe even revolutionary in the strokey beard world, while others thought it was a new low for a television star who had already had more than his fair share of them. But now, 20 years later, I suppose that we can look on Cheggers and justifiably call him a pioneer. Sort of. I mean, this is after all ludicrously obscure, barely anyone knows about it, and virtually none of it has been archived. Just a quick stoppage of the video here to tell you a little about the wrestling videos that are exclusively available on my Patreon. If you're a wrestling fan, especially a Japanese wrestling fan, you might want to see them. Our latest one is all about great jobber stories, so the details are in the top comment. Have a look, it's $2 a month. Thank you very much. Now, on with the video. So, what's the background? For those unfamiliar, for that read Americans, just who the bloody hell was Keith Chegwin? To give a quick summary, Keith Chegwin, or Cheggers for short, was a popular 1980s UK TV show host, famed for programmes like Cheggers Plays Pop, Cheggers Checks It Out, The Multicoloured Swap Shop, The Big Breakfast, all sorts. An eternally cheery and energetic scouser, the king of outside broadcasts, never without a smile on his face. He was kind of Marmite, to be honest. Either you loved him or you hated him. As is often the case with someone known for being endlessly smiley in front of the camera, there is a tears of a clown side to all of this. Cheggers went through no end of troubles with alcohol and relationships, which led to his star fluctuating and him making some questionable career decisions. In 2001, he was probably best known for the Channel 5 one-off show he'd recently hosted as part of a naturist evening called Naked Jungle, where millions of people got to see a man who was once one of the top TV personalities in the country fully in LaBeouf. Reaction to the show was negative, to say the least. For many, it was a perfect summary of Cheggers' downfall. Anywho, where did this whole idea for Cheggers' Bedroom come from? You could perhaps have a look at some of the successful live events that had occurred previously. Madonna and Sir Paul McCartney in particular had streamed concerts in the past year or so to naturally great interest. It's still a bit of a leap to go from huge star plays concert live on internet in front of millions to faded British TV star broadcasts live from bedroom to hundreds or thousands. But the weird thing is that if it was going to be anyone, you'd have probably guessed it would have been Cheggers. There was always a sense he was somewhat addicted to being in front of a camera or an audience, that he got a big buzz from it. A more negative way of putting this would be that he'd turn up to the opening of an envelope. I mean, how else could you explain agreeing to be bloody nude on television, surely knowing the reaction such a thing was going to get? Still, whether it was his own idea or somebody else's, Cheggers' Bedroom was born and started broadcasting for an initial 7 weeks from April 2001 on his new website, cheggersbedroom.com. Annoyingly, almost no record of this exists. I would love to be able to illustrate this with clips of Keith Chegwin doing his thing for 12 hours every day in his bedroom. But they've all been lost to time. Almost no evidence of Cheggers' Bedroom even exists, aside from a few news articles, a few interviews, and a few very low quality contemporary screenshots. So, you know what? I'm just going to have to use footage from the seminal PS2 classic Cheggers Party Quiz instead. Roll it! Going by the articles and reviews out there, Chegger's bedroom was actually a pretty sophisticated operation for the time. He had multiple cameras going, he could take phone calls on the air, there was a 30-second delay to prevent anything naughty going out, and a co-host by the name of Georgina. He'd present his own versions of popular quiz or entertainment formats like TFI Friday and The Generation Game, and even have the odd guest on. But most of the time would be spent nattering about important issues of the day, such as miling class from hearsay, plugging sponsors, or answering questions sent to his email address. There wasn't a live chat or anything. It all sounds like... well, it sounds like a live stream. Something you could easily just put on Twitch today. The thing that most people marvelled at about the broadcast, quite simply, was the endurance factor. Broadcasting for 12 hours every day? In 2001, that was pretty much unheard of, to attempt to be at least somewhat entertaining for that period of time? Jeez! People were certainly curious. The website generated a lot of traffic, usually enough for the servers to buckle under the pressure. A lot of it may have been morbid curiosity, people wanting to see an assured train wreck, or even wondering if he may actually just go ahead and get his dick out in front of the camera again. But the reviews from news websites were actually generally positive, again talking about how Chegwin surprisingly was able to stay engaging for such a long time, and contemplating just what this experiment meant for the future of broadcasting. The BBC website also has a Have Your Say page where we can look at some viewers' feedback for Chegger's bedroom, which is a bit more mixed. Let's hear some highlights. What a treat to get some British broadcasting down under. What a shame it's Keith bloomin' Chegwin, with his persistent desire to annoy and his blatant refusal to just give up and face the fact that he's old, tired and not very funny. Cheg off. This is inspired revolutionary genius. Nice one. What Keith has done, following in the footsteps of some smaller events, is to show that anyone with the right experience and the right systems can broadcast their own ideas across the net. Broadcasting is no longer limited to the traditional media that we are used to. Keith Chegwin deserves some credit for experimenting with this new media form, and I wish him the best of luck. Poor. Very poor. Cheggers has reached an all-time low. Poor lad. No! First of all, we had to put up with his stupid giggling, then we had to endure his naked body. Now he wants us to see his bedroom. Grow up, Cheggers. If you want to appeal to adults, act like a grown-up. This is even more sad than what's happened to Jason Donovan. Also, even on a T1 lease line, the viewing is almost unwatchable. I pity how it looks on a normal modem connection. Awful, awful, awful. Cheap and tacky, but I still watched it for an hour. I suspect that Chegger's work on the Naked Jungle was just preparation for the hopefully very unlikely day that this internet site goes pay-per-view. And finally, what talent! Brilliant! Isn't it about time the BBC put this megastar back on the TV in a new 6 PM late breakfast show type programme twice a week? That last one from Keith Chegwin, UK. I suspect that last one was somebody doing a funny. As for the other comments, again, either you loved or you hated Cheggers. You embraced his enthusiasm or derided his childish antics, and that certainly wasn't going to change through watching him twat around for hours talking about pop stars or dressing up in a chicken suit in his bedroom. But again, people were at least curious to watch, even if it was for a short amount of time. The website apparently logged 7 million visits in its first 7 weeks, according to Cheggers anyway, and they came from around the world, not just Britain. Many more people may have become familiar with the name of Keith Chegwin. And I would sure love to have seen their faces when they ran an Alta Vista or Ask Jeeves search or whatever, querying about the other shit he'd done. And yet, Chegger's bedroom's time on the internet was very short-lived. The initial test run of 7 weeks was a success, and the Chegger's bedroom website said that the show was going to come back bigger and better than ever, touting all the mentions it had in media, how long people were generally watching for, and saying that when it came back it was going to be on 24/7. But it never did come back. Whatever plans Cheggers had for it all quietly fell through, and after a couple of years of total inactivity, the website went offline in around about 2004 or so. The man moved on to other things, still appearing on regular TV pretty often and all that, still subject to mentions of that time he was in front of a camera with his willy waving about, or that period where he was on the booze and all sorts of things as such. The archetypal faded celebrity still keeping his name out there. Undeniably great at what he did, even if the star had faded and the hard living was catching up fast. And happily, never disgraced, unlike several of his contemporaries. I suppose that Cheggers' bedroom was a weird sort of pioneer in many ways. While there were surely the odd shoutcasts or whatever before then, small setups broadcast to a minuscule amount of viewers on Real Player or Winamp or whatever, it's hard to think of too many things before Cheggers' bedroom that offered consistent streaming to a decently sized amount of people, as opposed to just being a one-off event. It doesn't sound all that different to the sort of thing people do on Twitch today and get thousands of viewers for, even. It is easy to imagine Keith Chegwin being on Twitch nowadays, when lots of other people are now doing it, and generating the same sort of weird curiosity as he did in 2001. But alas, he passed away in 2017 from a lung condition, aged only 60. But maybe he can also be remembered now as an internet pioneer, as opposed to, well, any of that other thing. Just don't do a Chinese whisper and combine the two. He most certainly didn't get his dick out on an old internet stream, that's for sure. Anyway, bye for now. I always like to cover games with an interesting background, especially if it gives me an excuse to talk about something strange. I mean, the game here is hardly going to be the main event now, is it? But Super Trolley doesn't seem to be a game that holds all that much interest on the outside. It's a budget Spectrum title from the 1980s by Mastertronic, a studio renowned for many a game that, well, wasn't very interesting. But the story of how the game ended up getting made? Well, that's a doozy, considering that its existence is owed to the most evil man in the history of British television. It all seems so normal on the outside. Super Trolley is a game designed by a youngster named Andrew Collett. Big deal, surely. These were still the days of bedroom coding. Many a youngster was doing it. Back then, some of the people who made games were still in school when their first titles got published. To get published was a simple enough process. You make a game, you send it to a software house, and if they like it, they'll sign you up, and they'll pay you for the game. Simple enough. However, Andrew took a different approach. He thought his game idea was a good one, and so he decided to have someone fix it for him to have a developer make it. Ah yes, there he is, Mr. Black Magic himself, Jimmy Savile. An institution on British television for over 50 years, utterly celebrated in his lifetime, famed for his running, his Top of the Pops presenting, his many TV shows, the order to clunk click every trip, and all that charity work down places like Stoke Mandeville. A gift to the nation, if you will. When he died, the world of television stopped for a minute to bow their heads. The BBC even ran tribute shows dedicated to him, which in hindsight wasn't the best idea, considering what was to come. About a year or so after Savile's death, his full story finally came to light. Jimmy Savile was, for decades, a highly aggressive and prolific paedophile who used his position to prey on countless victims. Even down to his charity work in mental hospitals like Stoke Mandeville, which he saw as one of his favourite stomping grounds. And he was never caught, never so much as questioned. His headstone used to read, "It was good while it lasted." To some that felt like a suitable epithet at the time. Nowadays it feels like a punchline. Of course, all of this is well known. Jimmy Savile is the celebrity scandal, one that none of the recent cases can even come close to matching. Over here these days, even a whiff of such scandals can nuke your career. A lot of this is, indirectly, the aftermath of Savile, because the case of Savile is one of the greatest failures in the history of British justice and society, one that's hard to recover from. Here was a man who, for decades, was one of the most famous people in the country. He used that to abuse an untold amount of children, and he was never caught. He hid in plain sight. It's the old "no one will believe you" story made even darker. None of that's revelatory, but it's still one hell of a subject, especially considering that jokes and references to Saville's proclivities didn't just happen, they were common.
8-year-old girls love Jimmy Savile though, don't they? And of course... Anyway, I won't go on.
Yeah. Yeah, he loves her slot. That's what I'm saying.
I haven't been this excited since Jimmy Savile came to our open day at school and sat on my face.
Oh, God! Oh, I'm Jimmy Savile.
And I'm Jimmy Savile.
And we're running the London Marathon.
I hope nobody dies.
If they do, Bagsy, I take them to the mortuary.
How's about that then, guys and girls?
Yes, it's an appalling slur on the moral rectitude of Sir James Savile, whose interest in children has always been entirely above board.
I mean, a friend of mine reckons that Jimmy Savile's a paedophile. Rubbish, he's a child bender. That's why he does all the fucking charity work, just to gain public sympathy for when his fucking case comes up.
Looking back, it's almost clear that people suspected something. Hell, he barely even tried to hide it, thinking that his status covered him in Teflon and ultimately being proved right. Who believes a girl from a mental institution over someone knighted by the Queen? You wonder how he managed to get away with it, and the answer is, well, it's ugly. Still something we struggle to face up to. And yeah, perhaps not something to focus on right now.
You used to be a wrestler, didn't you? Is that right?
I still am.
Oh, yeah.
I'm feared in every girls' school in this country.
Anyway, Jimmy Savile's main show was, of course, Jim'll Fix It, a classic late afternoon dealie where children write into Jimmy asking for something, say an opportunity to go youth hosteling with Chris Eubank, and then Jimmy sorts said kid out with what they want. Feel good television. Yeah, he abused some of the guests on this show too. And it was here where Andrew Collett's letter was read, and he had the chance to have his game made by Mastertronic. Alas, the actual footage from the show has been lost to time, or at the very least it's not on YouTube, and I kinda doubt that the BBC responds much to requests for Jimmy Savile footage these days. I can at very least date the appearance to the 12th of March 1988, according to Sinclair User, and if you've ever seen Jim'll Fix It, you'll know how this generally works. Savile reads out the kid's letter, we get some VT where the shell-suited horror man goes and gets to work, the kid comes onto the show and gets presented with the reward and Jim fixed it for me badge, try not to choke on his cigar smoke, probably best to stick close to your parents in the green room afterwards, job's a good un. While it would have been interesting to see the footage itself, yeah, we're just going to have to roll with it. And of course, we do have the game itself, and there is the connection. The man on the front is quite unmistakably Jimmy Savile. This is the only game to feature an appearance from him, at least officially, although not the only game to feature a disgraced UK celebrity as it goes. There'll be a time to get to others, I'm sure. The inlay promises a frantic round of feverish activities where if you make one mistake, you'll be out on your ears. We'll see about that, shall we? And naturally it makes mention of the game being seen on BBC TV's Jim'll Fix It. Anyway, seeing as this is ostensibly a video about a game, how is it? After all this build-up, surely we should expect something weird, a game that we probably shouldn't be playing at all, something cancerous filtered through the twisted brain of a one-off man mental. And so here it is, the game endorsed and made possible by the most evil man in the history of British television, it's Super Trolley.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Jeez, this game. It's terrible, but not in a way you'd necessarily expect. One great thing about video games is how they make magic from the mundane. Take something that sounds dull on paper and turn it into a game. Tapper, Cook Serve Delicious, Papers, Please, Euro Trucks, that sort of thing. Super Trolley doesn't do that. It takes the mundane and makes it worse. Basically, you are a shelf stacker in a supermarket, a literal dog's body, lucky if you're on minimum wage. You are given various jobs to do, mostly, of course, stacking shelves. You get an item, you have to price them, all of them, and then find the empty shelf they're supposed to be on. And that's basically it. There's not much else to this game. You remember Advanced Lawnmower Simulator? The game made by Your Sinclair as a joke where you play as a YTS junior gardener who invariably ends up getting killed? This game is like that, only it's decidedly not a joke. Our hero slumps around the shelves with the sort of depressed stride you'd expect from someone who's stuck in this simulation of menial labour instead of, I don't know, saving damsels, killing terrorists or something like that. There is one obstacle in his way, the horde of old cronies prowling around the store, getting in the way, who will get you fired if you bump into them too much. Other than that, well, you're stacking. It won't take long to learn where everything is supposed to be, so it's not like there's all that much challenge to the game. And yet, the RZX Archive playthrough of the game comes in at over 4 hours, with this single screen as your reward announcing your promotion to manager and the option to restart the game and let the cycle begin anew. The challenge doesn't come from the game itself, it's all about how long you can stand it. Sometimes different things do happen, and yet all they do is remind you of the misery of this job, the indignities it puts on you. You accidentally knock a bunch of tins over, pick them all up, go outside for a much needed fag break, only to be told that you can't because some shoppers knocked the tins down and so you've got to pick them all up again. You cannot leave until all the work is done, and guess what? The work is never done. Perhaps the worst of all was the announcement that a stray dog had entered the supermarket. You go around everywhere looking for the bloody thing, pick it up and set it loose. Yay! But now the next task comes in. Get a mop and clean up the puddles of water that the dog's left behind. Somehow I don't think water is quite the whole story here, is it? So yes, this is a game where one of the highlights is, quite literally, walking around a supermarket floor and cleaning up dog piss. It doesn't get much bleaker than that, folks. Super Trolley then is surprisingly something unique. It's worth noting that very few magazines actually reviewed it. It passed by with nary a mention, despite the connection to television. Maybe they just didn't know what to make of it. Maybe they thought it should be swept under the rug. Maybe, just maybe, they didn't want to hurt a child's feelings. I don't know Andrew Collette, of course. As much as it amazes me that a young kid, the sort of person who's supposed to be full of creativity and imagination, would come up with the idea for such a game, I wouldn't want to speculate. I mean, I'm sure this wasn't what he envisioned. Maybe it's Icon Design's fault, the developers. Maybe they decided to make the game this way. Maybe Mastertronic did it. Maybe, just maybe, Saville himself stepped in and demanded that the game teach the kids who'd buy it a few life lessons. Mainly that life's shit, you grow up, you get your head down, and then you die having achieved none of your ambitions, stuck in a dead-end job until you croak. That seems like the sort of thing he'd do. I really didn't know what to expect out of Super Trolley. I might have thought it to be a one-of-the-mill, shoddy, late-spectrum budget title, but I didn't expect this at all, this pain to life's miseries. Perhaps it's appropriate, really, that the game connected to such a horrible man would be this way, that it would be nothing but drudgery. Maybe there's a message in there somewhere. It is certainly a strange game. What was the end goal here? Honestly, I don't know. I don't want to know. I'm just glad that I avoided the game when I was a kid. It's so remorselessly grey and hopeless it would rob someone of their best years, for they would have seen the world for what it was before their time. And hey, Jimmy knew a lot about that, didn't he? And somewhere down there, he's smiling on all of it. For the man who had a hand in this would surely have no trouble calling a lake of fire home. Good night.
I'd never brought any harm to anybody. I've never bad-mouthed anybody. It sounds a bit yucky, but it's my nature, it's my lifestyle, and I never thought there was a profit in being bad. There might be a profit for a few days, a few weeks, even a few years, but sooner or later you get your comeuppance.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like it, please do like it, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon, where you can join the list going down here. Anyway, for this video I'd like to thank the following: Adam Schaefer, Alex Stocco, Andrew Dalton, Andy Capt, Audie Sawley, Carly, Sethlin, Conformist, Daniel David Taylor, Dustin Cooper, Gary Pinkett, George Newton, Ghostly Spectre, Grafham Blackpool, Ian Roberts, James Idd, James Loveridge, Jason Durso, Jason Goy, Jason Leach, Jason Stevens, Johan Eriksson, Josh Jensen, El O'Brien, Lee Norris, ManagerSim.net, Mark Heslop, Mark Johnston, Martin Pataki, Nanette McCrone, Olaf Albeen, Pete Morris, Peter Jack, Peter Sidorn, Phil Taprog, Rachel Maxwell, Romeo, Ryan Wyatt Coleman, Sammy Lee, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Stephen Warner, Taylor Armand, The Unnatural, Tanyu J, Twisted Scroat, Vishar D, Yurka Operator, and Zach Roach.